So a lot of videos have been posted. Actually, I've posted 4 more. All right, so because there's actually no documents open in Illustrator now, and if I close this or minimize this window in Acrobat, personal life getting broadcast. Okay, so any setting I set up now will be a default setting because there's no documents open. So if I go to Illustrator and I, excuse me, go to General, the first thing you might notice is the keyboard increment movement, and it is set at 1.0008 pixels. The constrain angle is 0 degrees. Corner radius is 12 pixels. So if I was making a lot of curved cornered shapes, I might want to set this up to a different value, such as 0.25 IN. So that's one setting that I would probably change. This is also kind of a neat thing. Select same tint percent if you're working with custom colors, or rather global colors in Illustrator. You can select via the color picker for a choice that would be select same fill color and select same stroke color, but unless you actually check this box, you will not be able to select same tint color. So I'm going to check that. Okay. A couple others. I'm not going to do tons of settings, but under units, this one's pretty important to me. I like my units and increments to be set at inches, and stroke and type should both be at points. Under guides and grids, this is where I could change the color of guides. Perhaps I want my guides to be a lighter light blue, like a much more pale cyan. And you can also change them to either dots or lines. If lines bug you, you can use dots. And also change the grid color, a background grid color. This is where you can assign how often there are grid marks. And again, I could change this to 0.25 space IN. And it converts it for me to 18 pixels. Hyphenation, based on UK English or USA English. I'm going to leave it as USA. And this one, appearance of black. Okay, now, there are 2 types of black. Well, there's more than 2 types of black, but there are 2 very important types of black that are important to know about. There is the thing called black, which is 100% black ink. And there is another kind of black that is called rich black. Rich black refers to a black on a printed piece that contains 100% of black ink and usually 30% of cyan, 30% of magenta, and 30% of yellow ink. The point of that is to have a black in your design that has a much more hefty, thicker, saturated look to it, as opposed to if you just use regular black in large black areas, your black will look like a dark gray to you. It may not really give it a nice, delicious, impactful, rich feeling. These 2 settings, however, refer to how you see your blacks. Display all blacks accurately or output all blacks accurately. I've already set these settings to the settings I like, which is to display and output blacks accurately. I don't know why I wouldn't want it like that, but it is important to understand what rich black is. And now if I click OK and I create a new document, immediately my work is set up as width and height in inches as opposed to pixels, points, or any other measurement that I do not want. So if I choose a profile such as the print profile, and it is giving it to me in points again, that's kind of odd. Should not be doing that. Should be giving me in inches. Maybe I needed to restart. So I'm going to set it and click OK. I'm going to close this document. I'm going to quit Illustrator. I'm going to check that setting again just to be on the safe side. Illustrator Preferences, and come on, baby. Units, general inches, yep. Okay. And I'm going to quit Illustrator, and hopefully when I create my next Illustrator file, my increments of measure will be correct. My units. And there it is. Now it's in inches. Okay? So I needed to restart, which seems awkward, but there it is in any case. Now it's in inches, whereas before it was not. All right, so I'll click OK. Now, the next several settings I want to talk about are based on working with print, or tongue-tied here, are about working with print. So some of these can be kind of snoozy. I'm not going to go through a lot of detail, but enough so that you understand what's happening. First and foremost is the document's color mode. If this document is for the web, you should check this and make sure that if you're designing a web page in here that the document color mode is on RGB and not on CMYK. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and black versus red, green, blue. Okay. Next, I'm going to go under the Edit menu and go to Color Settings. Extremely important. Right now, as I'm looking at what my settings are set at for my Illustrator, you can see that I have sRGB for my RGB color space. sRGB is a PC gaming space, and in general, that is not the right setting for print documents. It should be the legacy setting of Adobe RGB 1998. This is the most flexible and full gamut or full range color setting that you can pick without knowing specifically if there is a different color system you should work in. You should choose this option. Your CMYK US Web Coded, this is again a fairly common setting for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or for color printing, but if you know for a fact that your content that you're designing is going to be printed in another country, it's incredibly important to talk to the people who are going to be printing your document and know what settings that they prefer you use. They won't ask you. You're going to need to ask them. And in most cases, large printing companies all over the world have their own color management policies. And in fact, this is something you can turn off and on. And as you choose your different choices here for your printing types, all of these are also things that you can load inside of your working spaces. And you can see here there's a load button. So if a printing company in China, let's say, is going to be printing your brochure, you would ask them for your color settings document so that you can load it. And that means that the color that you're seeing represented while you design will more closely represent what would be printed when it's printed. Color settings can vary just drastically from printer type to printer type and from ink type to ink type. And although a lot of companies that do printing have converted to more green and sustainable ink types, such as soy-based inks, soy-based ink companies that make the inks, the viscosity, the smoothness, the thickness, the graininess, the transparency of inks can vary quite a bit. So that is something you want to etch in the back of your mind. Who is printing this document? And if it's not something common, such as I get a lot of my documents for clients that I do printed in Oakland at PS Print. So these are the correct settings for PS Print. But they might not be for a different printer in New York or Alabama or what have you. Okay. Now, these two items have to do with if you open up someone else's document, or if you are placing a file in a document that's a photographic image or another illustration that you're putting inside of your document, it will have its own color profiles. And you have to decide upon placing that document whether to keep it as is, in other words, what's given to you, or whether you want to convert it to what you are building or creating. So if you're working with another artist internationally, you may need to make sure that they are going to work in the same working space as you, and the working space here is this, Adobe RGB 1998 and US Web Coded SWAP version 2 or V2. You may want to ask them to convert it and check it before they send it to you. And or you could turn this off and not deal with it and hope for the best. I would be very scared myself, especially if I was getting paid a lot of money, to not talk to somebody else who is working with me on a project. So I would set those to convert to working space. However, if you notice, there's some checkboxes here. And these checkboxes refer to whether or not you want to do it automatically or change your mind at the last minute. So if I check these checkboxes, ask when opening, ask when opening, and ask when pasting, at least at that very last moment, if I decide for some reason I don't want to be the one to convert their colors to my space, I can opt out at the last minute. Does this make sense? Sometimes you might have seen this. If you're pasting something into Illustrator or placing it, you'll see the color management policy says profile mismatch, convert or ignore. And if you convert it, it could change the color. And if you ignore it, it could print incorrectly. So if this seems a little bit scary and a little unnerving to you, that's probably good because you're paying attention. And if you want to do a quality job on your work and you don't want people coming back to you saying, what happened to that photo? Everything that's red looks sort of coral color. What the heck happened? It's something you need to etch in your memory. And it's not something that most people will ever tell you about on a job. They'll just expect you know that, and maybe they don't even think about it themselves. As a designer and an instructor, and as a person who has taken a lot of Adobe certification tests, I think about it because, all these are little nitpicky things that they ask you on the certification tests. So you don't want to forget that, especially if you're working with somebody overseas. It's likely to not match. All right, and then under here there are even more options, and these options refer to how it's converting the colors. The Adobe CE or Adobe Color Exchange is one method, and you can see that there's also the CMM, Apple CMM, and that is an Apple Color Matching System. And most of the time, I couldn't imagine why I would need that to be an Apple anything unless I was designing something to be on a Mac screen. Which, if you're designing an application, a program, then you may very well need that to be in Apple Color. And these are now have become some custom settings that I've set, and I should probably save them. And I'm going to call these AER for my initials custom CSF color settings file. And that'll save that for me. So I can always come back to my settings. If I have to change it to something else, I won't have to figure out what I had that set on. I can come back to that and I'll click OK. Okay, so continuing with this very exciting topic, there is a little bit more that I want to talk about regarding this. When you are designing and looking at your work, and you look at view, and there's this thing called overprint preview. Haven't really talked about that at all. And I'm now going to talk about what that means, overprint preview. So I'm going to zoom in and create a couple of semi-transparent shapes. I'm going to fill this with a very primary looking red. And now you see there are two marks here. This mark at the top means that the color that I've selected is not within the CMYK printing gamut or range. And if I click on this little shield, it actually has now shifted that color to a far less bright red. And now that is a print safe color. So when you see that little yield warning sign, it means that the color that you've chosen will not print CMYK. And it's also not a web-based color. Now, a web-based color anymore in 2016 really doesn't mean a whole lot, but it used to be a pretty important thing when you were compressing files. I don't know that really falls into line at all anymore if you're designing, for the US. I would be remiss to say how current web color standards are on monitors internationally, but that is what that little shield means. So now I'm filled with a red that actually looks like the red I chose, but is not that color. And I'm going to choose no stroke. And that is because of a couple of things, which I will continue to explain. And now I'm going to draw another shape here, and I will change the color of this shape. And I'll give myself some kind of a yellow color here. And again, there's the spooky shield. I go bright like that, and then I click this shield. That should now be a safe color to print from. But again, on my preview, it does not look at all accurate to the color that I chose. If I go under View, a couple of things that you should recognize. One is, how are these things blending, or are they not blending together? So I want to select this yellow shape and change the opacity. I could do this in a couple of different ways. One way I could do this is if you look on the layer, every single layer here, I just had a Photoshop moment there. All right, so if I select this layer and I go under Window and I go to Appearance, this is the panel I want. Under Appearance, I can now change the appearance or the settings of this yellow. And I'm going to change it from an opacity of default, which is 100, to something less than that. Okay. And I get this error, operator error. All right, so I have my semi-transparent color. And if I go to View and I do Overprint Preview, if I see something that's strikingly different, I know that I could be in some serious trouble. I really didn't see any shift at all. Sometimes you will see color shift when you blend colors together when you do an overprint preview. In the past, this control for overprint preview, excuse me, I knew that was going to be happening. I'm still kind of getting over the thing. It would really slow down if you chose this overprint preview. And here I'm really seeing like minor to no shift at all. But depending on what colors that you're choosing, you may see a greater or a lesser shift in the colors, giving you an indication of what to expect when you actually print this out, because this one color is printing on top of or overprinting on the other color. So it's creating a new color. And what is that color? Well, if I press I for eyedropper and I click, it's really difficult to tell what that color is. Like, I have no idea what that color is. There's no way for me to know what that color is. There is actually a way for me to know what that color is, but not by sampling it in this manner. If you look inside of Object, one of the odd things that you rarely get to use here is rasterize. Now, back in the day, before 2000 and something, you couldn't really see transparency and overprinting at all in Illustrator. And you would have to take your image and save it and then open it up in Photoshop. And it would rasterize or blend the work together, the pieces together, so that you could see an accurate representation of the colors that you're mixing together. Now, if I was to save this, which would be a smart thing to do, save as, and I'm just going to call this and not in the settings folder. I'll just put it out on my desktop. I'll call this one test. Okay. Now it's safe and sound, and if I select all, Command A, and I go to Object and I choose Rasterize, it's actually going to let me see, without taking it into Photoshop, what this would look like when, or closer to what it would look like when it prints, because eventually when your work goes to the printing company, they will rasterize it. Rasterize is the process of taking something vector and turning it into pixels. So here I can see I can change to a medium or a low resolution or set a completely different setting for this. I'm just going to put it in medium so it doesn't take a really long time, and click OK. Now, at this point, you can see it's kind of jaggy on the edges, right? But the nice thing is that I can choose this and find out what that color is. So if I was aiming to get a very specific color here, I may have to adjust the other colors in my document, and or I could check these colors inside of a CMYK printing book. And that is the next topic. What is a CMYK printing book? All right, so in the long and short of it, at the end of the day, I would not want this rasterized. I would need to undo this, because if I'm really going to send this to the printer, I'll be very sad if this is rasterized at the wrong resolution. So I just did undo a couple of times because I had clicked around and lost that setting. But a CMYK printing book is something that if you're planning on designing for print, you need to purchase. A CMYK printing book is not a cheap thing. Process color refers to the mixing of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink to create other colors. And although we have a pretty good idea of what our colors look like on the screen, our screens can never perfectly represent a color in CMYK, even if the settings are on CMYK, because you're working on an RGB device. Your screen is an RGB device. So you need to have one of these books with 24,000 colors in it. So these books are books of grids of colors that allow you to go and find the mathematical percentages of color, so that when you're looking at said orange, you can see how many percent of each color is mixed into that color and get a more accurate representation of what that color is going to look like when printed. So page after page of matrices of color that then you can find, okay, well, this one is 10% yellow, and no, this is 70% yellow, and overall 40% magenta with no black. And black starts 100 here and goes this way to 10. So this is 80 yellow, 40 magenta, and my black is at, where's my black at? Yellow, black, okay, and 10% black. Okay, so this is 80 yellow, 10 black, 40 magenta. That's what that square will look like. But you need to see it, what it looks like printed. Does this make sense? Ink is not a pixel, right? So we have here projected color based on subtractive color system where we're looking at RGB phosphors shooting millions of times in seconds, actually flashing, but your eye can't catch that. And we're representing a CMYK object inaccurately. So if you want to print, if you want to design and print, you need to buy one of these. It's $113. Crazy, right? You can get a used one for $29.40, but if you do get a used one, make sure it's in excellent condition. If these books are exposed to too much sunlight, the colors will be inaccurate. I keep mine in a drawer so that it's, like new. And that way, when I'm picking a color and I'm trying to sample that color, I'm figuring out what that color is really going to look like. I'm not going to have a horrible surprise. Orange and green are the most difficult colors for computers to display. And so that's why this particular color is really a conundrum. All right, so that's a little bit about printing. I'm going to go ahead and pause and printing. If you take a look under view, there are a couple more areas to discuss. One is proof setup, and the other one is proof colors. And if I choose proof colors, what would happen is if any of these colors were out of range of the colors that they are supposed to be, they would or the printing range, you'd see a drastic shift. And I saw an ever so slight shift there. I don't know if you noticed it, but if I turn that off, do you see the difference? See it changing? Not really? If you want to come up here, you can see it. Feel free to stand up and come over here. But without this checkbox on, this color is a lot more saturated and bright. And when I come back over here and turn this back on again, this is more accurate. I really don't even think that's that accurate. The color that I chose is a lot flatter. It's not nearly as saturated and bright. So be very aware of that. You're looking at your color on an RGB device. So that's one thing, to be another sticklery graphic design thing. And then you also got this thing called proof setup. Now, this proof setup is set for the working CMYK US web-coded swap v2. But if I set the settings differently for the working space for CMYK, these colors would change on screen, and sometimes quite a bit. I honestly do not know how to see these things, the color blindness situation. If you're colorblind, I don't really know what I could do to help you with that. I feel bad, but that's what it looks like if you've got different types of color blindness, which is interesting. So if you know for some reason that you're designing for a colorblind audience, that could be something you want to know about. And there's two different types. There's protanopia and there's deuteranopia, two different types of color blindness. So now you know what it looks like if you're colorblind. And finally, I'm going to turn off my color blindness settings because they make me sad. And I'm so happy I can see colors. All right. Now, when you are printing on different types of strata, you also have a setting to be concerned about, which is called dot gain. And dot gain is kind of a how should I say, very particular and specific to each type of strata or type of content that you're printing on. So when you are sending this to print, so if I was to send this to print now, Command P, and I currently really don't have a printer to send this to, but there are several different settings to be aware of. One is the general settings of what printer you're setting it to, and size and scaling and such. Your marks and bleed. Printer's marks include trim marks, registration marks, which are the marks that help colors get aligned on large printing presses, color bars where printers check the clarity and accuracy of colors, other things like page information. So when you are printing a document or a large sheet, your name can be on that page information, the name of the document. And none of these things will actually be exported out on your work unless you check these marks. Some printers want you to set these marks. Some printers don't want you to set these marks. Some printers will charge you if you don't set the marks. So again, you want to check in with your printer and talk to them. Under output, again, these are settings that usually your printer is going to take care of for you, but you can ask them if they're going to take care of this. Now this part over here, where we are talking about dot shape, okay? And because of my very generic printer I have on here, none of these are particularly high-end printers, but this dot shape situation here, right there, an angle and frequency is a setting called dot gain or dot. In color printing, what is actually occurring, and I'm going to go ahead and just click done for now or cancel, is that every single place in your document that gets printed is printed with a tiny, tiny dot of ink. And to make this color of orange takes this color of yellow and this color of red to make that color of orange, right? Now, the dots that occur when you're printing, or the printing dot, can change size and it can spread. And that spreading that occurs is called dot gain. So this is kind of a good illustration of what dot gain can look like depending on what you're printing on. So if you're printing on a very hard surface, such as a cardboard, or this is like some kind of laminate material that's been printed on this desk, or an aluminum can, or on a piece of newsprint paper, the dot of ink is going to spread differently. That spreading is called gain. If it swells a lot, that's a lot of gain. And if it doesn't swell at all, there's no gain. It doesn't gain size or grow. So depending on that printer type, you may have to set a specific number for that dot gain. Okay? So you may want to talk to your printer if you are creating something for an aluminum can, or if you're going to be designing content for wallpaper. What is the strata? What is the printing thing that is going to be printed on? And should you expect there to be any gain? So these are things that I keep. I have a little checklist that I look at and make sure that I'm looking at it when I'm talking to a printer I haven't worked with before. And gain is one of those. And do they want printer's marks? And are there specific color settings? Okay. So, graphics, again, you can change your settings depending on the printer type. These printers that I have set as my printer types are not high-end printers, so there's really not a lot of flexibility in these settings. But these are all things that you'll want to look at before you send this, especially if it's going overseas. And you can see that on my Brother printer, it wants to print in the Adobe RGB style of printing, but you'll notice if you print this out with these different settings on the same piece of artwork from your own printer, you'll see very different results, the way it's going to mix color. And it's worth doing an experiment, and the experiment that I would recommend that you do is create your own color swatches, which I'm going to show you how to do now. Okay? So I'm going to just click cancel and pause again, or actually stop this recording.